ম্যাম স্টার্ট করে দিন ম্যাম।
Welcome to today's international webinar organized by the Department of History and IQAC, Kishore, Bharati, Bhagini, Nivedita College, Kolkata, in collaboration with the Department of History and IQAC, New Alipore College, Kolkata. Topic of today's webinar is Missionary Women and Governesses, Mission, Passion and Career in Colonial Bengal. These are the less explored areas in history. Today we have with us two esteemed speakers, Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem, Professor, Department of History, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of History, Diamond Harbour Women's University. They will definitely make us enlightened with their lectures. Now, I would like to request our principal and chief patron of today's webinar, Dr. Shiv Shankar Sana, to deliver the keynote address and inaugurate the program. Sir.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible, sir. You are audible, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Principal Dr. Joydeep Sarangi, New Alipore College. Honorable Speaker Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem, Professor, Department of History of University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of History of Diamond Harbour Women's College. Distinguished participants, my dear colleagues, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me an immense pleasure in welcoming to all of you to the international webinar on the topic Missionary, Women and Governesses, Mission, Passion and Career in Colonial Bengal, organized by Department of History and Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Kishore, Bharati, Bhagini, Nivedita College in collaboration with Department of History and IQAC of New Alipore College. I would like to express my sincerest thanks to Srimati Sutapa Mukhopadhyay, Head of Department of History, and Sri Rajesh Das, Coordinator of IQAC of Kishore Bharati Bhagini Nivedita College, and Dr. Saboni Dotto, Head Department of History of New Alipore College, and Dr. Sammaprato Das, IQAC Coordinator of New Alipore College, for organizing this webinar. If we look back into the history, we see that Bengal felt the impact of European missionaries at the close of 16th century. Various missionary societies started coming to Bengal to propagate their activities in the form of strong evangelical faith of views in social and educational reform after the Charter of 1813 was enforced. The missionaries had laid a great importance on implementing Western English education, though they never neglected native education, and consequently, Western education was communicated through native vernaculars. A large number of women missionaries in Bengal, like Dorothy Carey, Hannan Marchman, Mrs. Yates, Mrs. Pierce, Marian Cook, Mrs. Mundy, Miss Barr, Mrs. Whitbread, and Hannah Mullins, St. Mary Chaplain Bellarmy, Lady Campbell, and St. Xavier groups, among others, were more active in their mission to educate and uplift native girls and women. These women rendered invaluable service in running schools and boarding houses for girls and providing shelter and security to widows and orphans in the missions. Welfare activities had remained as one of the most important agenda of the Christian missions throughout the 20th century in India. Government efforts, though increased, was not sufficient. Understanding the need for it during the years of the Second World War and after independence, missionary activities had declined. The number of the foreign missionaries had in fact a sudden drop, and financial help from the missions in abroad also decreased considerably. Notwithstanding this, the missions, schools, colleges, and other institutions of special education are still there nurturing the Indian students to prospect, for they still have the zeal and the urge to disseminate education. I am not expert of this field. We have assembled in this virtual platform to more about the topic from our eminent speakers for today's webinar. I am sure that you all will feel enriched with knowledge from this webinar. I once again welcome to all of you to the seminar and hope that you will have a great time ahead. I hope this webinar will get a grand success. Thank you everybody.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable words. Now I would like to request Dr. Jaideep Shorongi, Principal, New Alipore College, and other chief patron of today's webinar, to give his valuable speech. Sir.
Good afternoon and approaching evening to all of you. My hearty thanks to the Department of History of both the colleges, New Alipore College and Kishore Bharati, Bhagini Nivedita College, for organizing this international webinar. And a webinar of a very pertinent issue, which has not been much discussed, colonial Bengal time, missionary women and governance. I'm really looking forward to it, and I am extremely glad the history departments are both the colleges are so active, and our moves with Kishore Bharati Bhagini Nivedita College is really working and going smoothly. I thank the Honorable Principal, Dr. Sana of Kishore Bharati College, for being so generous and hosting and participating in all activities together. For today's webinar, we have two very important speakers. One is Dr. Asha Islam and Nayeem from Bangladesh, and Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay from Diamond Women's University. They will enlighten us on this specific field. Because in the Colonial Bengal, missionary women and governance, they played a very active role between 1793 and 1861, of course. And their evangelic mission was very much important to the development of a society which was down under poverty and superstition. The light of education, the light of Western education, was instrumental in ushering new doors of hopes in those days. And these missionaries and these governesses worked really hard to reform Indian society, or more precisely to speak about Bengal, colonial Bengal. But very important is to note that their mission was not only a sacrifice, but also there was a mission hidden, of course, and in order to spread Christianity in some parts. So we are to be enlightened more in this area, more in the works by the missionary women and governance during this period. by the two esteemed speakers of this evening. I thank both the colleges once again and all the participants of the webinar and who are attending it. And I wish a grand success of this very important international webinars. To the speakers, hello from both the colleges. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it's time to move to the speakers. Before I invite Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem for a lecture, I would like to give a brief introduction of the speaker. Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem is a professor at the Department of History, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. She has been teaching in the department for the last 30 years. Her area of research interest is gender and history. She is board member of the International Federation for Research in Women's History and is currently the General Secretary of its Bangladesh branch. She is also General Secretary of the Bangladesh History Association and is an advisor to the National Archives of Bangladesh. Dr. Asha Islam is the editor of two journals, the Bangladesh History Association Journal and the Bangladesh Journal of American Studies. She has published extensively on women's education in 19th and 20th century Bengal in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Asha Islam has contributed chapters in many books like Rhetoric and Reality, The Colonial Experience, published by Oxford University Press, A History of the Girl, Formation, Education and Identity, published by Palgrave Macmillan, Switzerland, and Asha Islam and Aksadul Alam edited Readings in Bengal History, Identity Formation and Colonial Legacy, published by Bangladesh History Association. Her forthcoming book is From Andar Mahal to Schools, Women's Education in 19th Century and Early 20th Century Bengal from University Press Limited. Dr. Asha Islam is well-traveled and is proficient in English, Hindi and Japanese. She is the daughter of Professor Sirajul Islam, a famous historian and the chief editor of the National Encyclopedia of Bangladesh. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem to deliver a lecture. The title of her presentation is Female Missionary or Redundant Woman, Colony as Refuge for the Educated Ladies of Victorian England. Madam.
Thank you, Shutapa Mukhopadhyay, for your kind words. I'm honored to be participating in this international webinar organized jointly by the History Department of Kishore, Bharati, Bhagini, Nivedita College and New Alipore College and the IQAC body of both colleges. I thank the patrons, Dr. Shiv Shankar Sana and Dr. Joydeep Sarangi. And it is also a pleasure to be here with Dr. Aparna, who is speaking on a very interesting subject. I also thank all of you who are tuning in with us and who worked hard to make today's event possible. The title of my presentation is Female Missionary or Redundant Woman, Colony as Refuge for the Educated Ladies of Victorian England. The time frame for today's theme is the 19th century. Colonial Bengal in the 19th century is a field that has been widely researched, but continues to fascinate scholars immensely. One of the reasons the 19th century generates so much interest probably is that the relevance of that period has not diminished even as we are 2 decades into the 21st century. As we grapple with polemical gender issues today and try to understand the major discourses on gender relations and aspire towards gender equality, we keep going back to the 19th century when, for the first time, women emerged as a point of reference in academic discussions. It was within the cultural, social, and political context of tradition versus modernity, patriarchal role versus colonial intervention, that the women's question is posited. As the Bengali intelligentsia was trying to forge the ideological identity of a new woman, unique phenomenon that profoundly impacted a social reform agenda in her prize colony, Bengal. Beginning from the 1850s in England, for the first time in the history of missionary societies, church missions of every denomination, the London Missionary Society, the Church Missionary Society, the Baptist Mission, the Presbyterian Mission, to name only a few, saw a swelling in the ranks of female missionaries. And they were all eager to join foreign missions, eager to leave the home country and sail to faraway heathen lands. And it was not just English missions, but American and Canadian missions too. This phenomenal rise in the number of female missionaries in the second half of the 19th century has been termed as maternal imperialism by Barbara Ramosek in the book Western Women and Imperialism, Complicity and Resistance. The book was edited by Nupur Chaudhary and Margaret Strobel, and it came out in 1992. This new phenomenon, if we do give it the epithet maternal imperialism, raises a few questions. Why did the second half of the 19th century bring so many women missionaries from Britain, America, and Canada? Was it caused by a sudden surge of altruism to ameliorate the condition of women in Bengal? Or was India a place where the educated women from England could escape for opportunities of spiritual satisfaction or professional achievement? Finally, given the dominant subordinate nature of the power structure of colonial society, which category of women benefited more, the dominant white race or the subordinate group of indigenous women? How far was altruism at work? Barbara Ramosek documents how, for most of the single educated women, white women, India was a kind of escape from the emotional and spiritual barrenness of the post-industrial society of 19th century Britain. By the second half of the 19th century, England had a sizable number of educated women who suffered emotionally and materially from the lack of gainful employment. These women, who did not belong to the working class or were aspiring to climb the social hierarchical ladder through an education, could only become governesses in upper class homes because of the lack of employment opportunities elsewhere. Michael Sanderson, in his book Education, Economic Change and Society in England, published from Cambridge University in 1995, says, and I quote, "The problem in the 1840 to 1870 period was largely a middle-class one of finding careers for unmarried middle-class ladies. Around 1850, existing careers were limited, and becoming a governess was the only means of earning her livelihood open to the women of gentle birth." Rosalind Miles, a pioneer women's historian, opines that it was the paradox of empire that while colonized women fell victim to the domination of white males in addition to their own, Britannia's daughters took advantage of their superior position as representatives of the ruling race, seized the opportunity of escaping the stifling narrowness of home in search of professional life as doctors, teachers, preachers. And it was not only the British women for whom missionary engagement was a romantic alternative to the quote-unquote excruciatingly boring life of women, whose life options were limited to becoming a factory girl or a governess or finding a suitable husband for that matter. In North America, in the 19th century, college graduates increasingly began to find joining the women's foreign missionary movement more attractive than taking up a life of domesticity and taking up motherhood as a profession after attaining a college education. An interesting fact is that by the end of the 19th century, American women missionaries came to numerically dominate the Christian missions in India. For Canadian women also, mission fields in India and China provided them with career opportunities that were virtually non-existent at home. The work they did in the distant eastern lands halfway across the globe held rich possibilities for personal and spiritual fulfillment. Following in the footsteps of British and American women, in Canada, by the 1870s and 1880s, the three largest Protestant denominations, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Anglicans, began to support women's missionary work. Missionary societies also took note of this great reservoir of potential that remained untapped and began to appeal to those women whose energies found little scope in their own land. For Victorian women, missionary work not only provided avenues for independent adventure, but it also created opportunities to forge matrimonial relationships, opportunities which had not been available at home. The missionary historian C.P. Williams, in a book titled Women and Missions, Past and Present, Anthropological and Historical Perceptions, cites numerous reports about how missionary societies suffered losses because female missionaries came to India, found partners, and left the profession promptly. It was cited as a quote-unquote grave problem in the World Missionary Conference of 1910 held in Edinburgh. In Britain, the census of 1851 revealed a startling fact. It showed that the male-female ratio stood at 1,000 men for 1,050 women. The census showed that out of every 100 females of 20 years of age and above, 57 were wives, 13 were widows, and 30 were single women with no prospect of finding a husband. The imbalance was created by the incessant wars England had been embroiled in. And with that was added the immigration of a large number of the male population from England to the Americas, to New Zealand, to Canada, and to the colonies. The women left behind at home, destined to remain single, were counted as quote-unquote surplus. In 1869, William Rathbone Gregg published a book where he used a more derogatory term for these surplus women. He called them quote-unquote redundant women. And he gave the title of his book, he gave a very unceremonious title to his book, Why Are Women Redundant? That's the title of his book. Now, Rathbone puts the plight of quote-unquote redundant women thus, and I quote him, "It is the women from the middle and upper classes who were raised by fortune above the necessity of caring for their own subsistence, but to whom employment is a necessity, because only employment can fill the dreary void of an unshared existence. Beautiful lay nuns who pine for work, who crave for interest in life." Inherent in such representations of Victorian women are the tensions of a complex society born out of the Industrial Revolution of the previous century. It turned out that As a direct result of Western society's inability to provide for their educated women, neither in the professions nor in the matrimonial sector, it was the colonies that, where they were eventually absorbed as educators, as nurses, doctors, and of course, missionaries. However, having said this, we must acknowledge the selfless contribution the female missionaries have made in the field of women's education and health in Bengal and other parts of India. A feature unique to Bengal in general and Eastern Bengal in particular was the Zenana education system that was set up as a parallel form of formal education for girls by these female missionaries. This peripatetic form of education, going from door to offer education, was set up because upper class Hindu and Muslim families would refuse to send their daughters to the schools that the missionaries had built, because then they would be contaminated through mixing with the girls from the lower classes. When the grant in aid system was set up by recommendation of the Hunter Commission of 1882, the missionary lobby ensured that home-taught girls got aid too. The missionary societies also received government support. The annual report on education for 1877-78 shows that of the rupees 16,420 spent on Zenana education, rupees 14,804 went to missionary societies. And when I say Zenana education, I'm sure you all understand that Zenana is the Persian word for woman. So it is the women's education is called Zenana education. Begun in Kolkata in 1841 by a Miss Saville under the auspices of the Church of Scotland Women's Mission, the Zenana education system was quickly picked up by all other denominations. The noted historian Geraldine Forbes, however, attributes the beginning of Zenana education to Hannah Catherine Mullins, who was invited by a gentleman in Kolkata to teach his wife embroidery. In Eastern Bengal, the part which is now Bangladesh, in Eastern Bengal, Zenana education work was begun in Joshua by Elizabeth Sully, wife of the missionary John Sully. Because of the presence of a large number of female missionaries, it was possible to quickly expand the peripatetic service to almost every district of Bengal. The difference between the home education of the past and the Zenana education that female missionaries set up was that of both structure and content. The missionaries devised a structured curricula of domestic science, handcrafting, rudimentary maths, English, and of course Bible reading. The main idea, of course, was to proselytize. Students sat for tests, and those that passed got prizes and certificates. By the 1860s, however, local Zenana agencies sprang up as a reaction against aggressive proselytization attempts of the missionary ladies in the Zenana Mahals. Zenana Mahal is where the women resided. Strong anti-missionary reaction grew in strength from the 1860s in Kolkata also. Societies and associations were formed to counter the evangelical attempts of the missionary organizations. The Hindu revivalist movement of the 1880s and 1890s presented missionary activity with serious resistance. Missionary societies then felt obliged to move into the hinterland, into the tribal areas. Missionary societies were welcomed by Garos and tribals of Khasi and Jaintia hills. Christianity for them was accompanied by modern education and a chance to improve their financial conditions. The Zenana education system that had enjoyed government patronage from 1882 onwards began to decline by the second decade of the 20th century. The First World War seriously crippled the resources of the missions. The chief resource for continuing Zenana missions was the constant flow of women joining the church. But the war effort provided jobs for women at home. They no longer had to look to the church for employment. Thus, with the decline of the constant input of the female Christian missionaries, the Zenana education the system became weaker and weaker. And in 1933, the government abolished the Zenana education system totally. And the Zenana education system that was set up as a parallel system of formal education for the girls was actually a source of it helped the social reform agenda, because for many Bengali women it was the only window to the outside world. And having said that, I want to conclude by reiterating that this maternal imperialism or cultural imperialism, whatever we call it, the benefits went both ways. We must not think that the colonial rhetoric of the white woman's burden, if we may say so, the colonial rhetoric of this white woman's burden and the sole responsibility of women's education did not actually fall on the foreign missionaries. The local agencies were also played a huge part in the amelioration of Bengali women. And in the concluding remarks, I want to truly acknowledge the selfless contribution that they have made. Thank you very much to everyone for listening in. Shutaba. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asha Islam, for your amazing lecture. It's such a brilliant exposition. Thank you again. I think we will go to the question answer session at the end. After the completion of the lecture session of our next speaker. Now I would like to invite Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay. Before that, I will go for a brief formal introduction of the speaker. Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay is an associate professor in history at Diamond Harbour Women's University, West Bengal, India. She was formerly an associate professor in history in the West Bengal Education Service and had served several government colleges, including Lady Brabourne College, Kolkata. Her book, titled Desire and Defiance, A Study of Bengali Women in Love, 1850 to 1930, based on her doctoral dissertation, was published by Orient Black Swan in 2016. She has co-edited 2 anthologies on women's studies. She completed a UGC-sponsored research project on A Leisure of Women's Own, television mega serials and Bengali women in contemporary Kolkata. She is currently co-editing her story, A Face Strip, for Professor Geraldine Forbes. Her research interests include the social history of colonial Bengal with a focus on social reform, women's everyday lives, violence, love, and leisure. She is also interested in women's writings. She has published a large number of articles in journals and edited volumes. Readers can follow her work on academic education. Today, Aparna Bandopadhyay will speak on The Governess in Bengali Life and Fiction, Perspectives from the Colonial Era. Madam.
Thank you, Shutapa. That was an introduction that really bowled me out. I feel I'm really feeling honored by your very warm words, and I extend my sincere thanks to Principal Sir of Kishore Bharati Bhagini Nivedita College, Coed, and also the Principal Sir of New Alipore College. These two colleges have collaborated to organize this international seminar. I really feel greatly obliged. Today I'll be speaking on the governess in Bengali life and fiction, perspectives from the colonial era. Much of what I'll be speaking today has already been spoken by our former speaker, Professor Asha Islam. I have read Asha these works, her articles, and I am deeply indebted to her for many of her insights. I'll try not to be repetitive as much as possible. I'll try to avoid repetition. She has spoken a lot about what I had planned to speak today, but then again I'll try to say something new, something that she hasn't yet said, but definitely it's there in her works, in her larger writings. Yes, the governess was at the center of the Zenana system of education, and missionaries, the missionary women, to be precise, played a very important role in the Zenana system of education. But as I said, that I'll not repeat what she said, so I'll be focusing on governesses who were not missionaries, who were either Brahmos or Hindus, I mean non-Brahmo Hindus or Muslims. Okay, so my focus would be more on the governess and less on the system of education, the Zenana system of education, which Professor Asha Islam has so brilliantly put forward before us, presented before us. I will begin with two lines from a poem by Ishwar Chandra Gupta. আগে মেয়েগুলো ছিল ভালো, ব্রত ধর্ম করত সবে, একা বেথুন এসে শেষ করেছে, আর কি তাদের তেমন পাবে? এরা আপন হাতে হাঁকিয়ে বগি গড়ের মাঠে হাওয়া খাবে। The girls of yore were good. They would engage themselves in brothos, in worship, in various religious rites and rituals. But this man Bethune, he has destroyed everything. He has destroyed these good women, corrupted them, and now they will be seen going to Gorer Mart, riding their own buggies. Okay. With these lines, the poet Ishwar Chandra Gupta expressed his apprehensions about educated women. He feared that women on receiving education would overturn the established moral order and go haywire. And he held John Drinkwater Bethune, the founder of Bethune School, culpable in this regard. Gupta had penned these lines in 1850, a year after the foundation of Bethune School. Over the succeeding decades, more and more women went to schools and colleges and eventually to medical colleges and universities, sought employment as teachers and doctors, and increasingly participated in various strands of nationalist politics. It is difficult to say how many of them drove their own buggies to Gorer Mart. As we know, if you are a resident of Kolkata, is a big ground, open ground, where people assemble in the evenings to have have some fresh air. Okay. Evidence does indicate that yes, women, it's not, we are not sure whether women drove their own buggies to Gore Mart or some other popular destination in search of fresh air or in search of entertainment, but evidence does indicate that more and more women were crossing the threshold of their homes in quest of education, employment, and an active political role. From its very incipience, history had largely been the story of men and their doings in the public domain. Since women, with the exception of a few queens, princesses, and rebels, had been excluded from this domain, they had remained outside the purview of history. With the feminist intervention in history since the 1970s, the hitherto invisibilized role of women in the realms of politics, diplomacy, economy, and culture have begun to be foregrounded. At the same time, the supposedly trivial aspects of life, the life within the home, away from the public domain, have drawn the attention of feminist historians who have begun to focus on different aspects of women's quotidian existence, their health, education, their vocation and leisure, their culinary styles and sartorial habits, their domestic roles, their role as nurturers and caregivers, their sexuality, the love and violence pervading their intimate relationships, friendships and subcultures, their worlds of custom and ritual, etc., whatnot. Women's journey from the private to the public domain, the constant negotiations between the private and the public domains, and the angst and challenges accompanying the same have also begun to intrigue feminist historians. Inspired by the feminist project of restoring women from the scenes of history, I wish to explore Bengali women's forays into the professional world in the late colonial period. I wish to focus in this presentation on a very popular but under-researched vocation embraced by women in this time, that of a governess. The governess was at the center of the Zenana system of education. Zenana, as Professor Islam said, is a Parsi word connoting the inner domain of the household and also women. The Zenana system of education referred to education catered to women within the precincts of the household. In Bengal, this mode of women's education came also to be known also as Antapur Sri Shikha, the word Antapur connoting the inner private quarters of the household. The teachers visiting women students at their homes were initially English or European or American women, and hence the English word governess began to be associated with women professionals catering education to the inmates of the Antapur or Zenana. The governess was also at times referred to as the Zenana governess. The Zenana system of education or Antapur Sri Shikha, whatever you call it, was a system in which women were instructed by visiting teachers or teachers in residence within the confines of home in accordance with a specific curriculum without making it necessary for them, that is the students, to attend school. The Zenana system was thus a compromise between the Porda system and reformist desires to educate women. In this, women, mostly married women, received education without having to breach the Porda system. Paradoxically, the teachers engaged in teaching these Pardanasin women within the Zenana were themselves women who were not bound by the Parda. In fact, a precondition of this profession was mobility, a readiness to travel a lot and also stay away from their own families in hostels, in hired accommodations, or even at the residence of their boards. In contemporary records, I find a large number of names of women who served as zenana governesses in various parts of Bengal. A few of these names are followed by a bit of biographical information, but I wish to know more about them. I wish to know how they traveled to their destinations, that is, to the residence of their students, where they stayed, whether they faced sexual harassment on the road or at their students' residence or at the place they stayed, whether they were entitled to leave, how they handled issues of health and hygiene, how they handled their pregnancies, their menstruation, the treatment they received at the students' residence, whether they were offered a cup of tea or some food, or were they allowed to use the utensils that the inmates of the household would use, or they were asked to stay away from them, to sit separately, eat separately in separate set of utensils. We know that some doctors, when doctors visited their patients, they were often offered food, but like Kadambini Gangopadhyay, we come to know from some records that she was offered food in one of her patients' house, but she had to sit away from the family. She was treated as if she was unclean, as if her very touch was polluting. Okay. Now, were the teachers treated in a similar manner? I'm very curious to know how these governesses balanced work and familial obligations if they were married women. All these questions haunt me, but I struggle to find answers. The answers could have been found if these women had left behind diaries, letters, or other personal writings, autobiographies, memoirs. But unfortunately, I have not been able to come up on any of these. So most of my questions remain unanswered. Let me briefly explain what the Parda system was. Parda, according to Meredith Bothwick, was a form of social control exercised by men over women's behavior, which implied a contradictory view of women's nature. Both sexually vulnerable and in need of protection, and sexually aggressive and in need of control. Parda was a system of seclusion and segregation which relegated women to the private domain and debarred her free, unescorted movement outside the home. A woman was debarred from entry into public spaces and institutions, and if at all she moved outside home, it would be for the purpose of pilgrimage or visit to relatives, albeit with male escorts. She was debarred from engaging in institutional education, politics, and employment. Even at home, she was expected to keep herself under veil before her parents-in-law and senior male members of the family. Such restrictions applied more stringently to elite women, that is, women of the upper caste, aristocratic, middle-class backgrounds, while lower caste or economically less privileged women had relatively less stringent restrictions on their mobility and were allowed to work for a livelihood. The patriarchal emphasis on a woman's domesticity-oriented existence held equally good with regard to them. The governess subverted the Parda system in her own life to embrace pedagogy as her profession, but the beneficiaries of her pedagogic efforts, the students, were women who conformed to or were forced to conform to the restrictive norms of the Parda system. Traditionally, Vaishnavis would visit elite households to impart the basic lessons to women of the Antapur. Swarnakumari Devi recounts in her Shekele Kotha, this is her memoir, autobiographical piece, that a Vaishnavi would regularly visit their house when she was young and give senior women the basic training in letters. In her own words, now I read from Shekele Kotha, Ahar Biram Puja Archana ন্যায় শেখালেও আমাদের অন্তঃপুরে লেখাপড়া মেয়েদের মধ্যে একটি নিত্য নিয়মিত ক্রিয়ানুষ্ঠান ছিল। প্রতিদিন প্রভাতে গয়লানি যেমন দুগ্ধ লইয়া আসিত, মালিনীর ফুল যোগাইত, দৈবজ্ঞ ঠাকুর পাঁজি পুঁথি হস্তে দৈনিক শুভাশুভ বলিতে আসিতেন, তেমনি স্নান বিশুদ্ধা শুভ্র বসনা গৌরী বৈষ্ণবী ঠাকুরানী বিদ্যালয় বিতরণার্থে অন্তঃপুরে আবির্ভূতা হইতেন। ইনি নিতান্ত সামান্য বিদ্যাবুদ্ধি সম্পন্ন ছিলেন না। সংস্কৃত বিদ্যায় ইহার যথেষ্ট ব্যুৎপত্তি ছিল, অতএব বাংলা জানিতেন ইহা বলা বাহুল্য। উপরন্তু ইহার চমৎকার বর্ণনা শক্তি ছিল, কথকতা ক্ষমতার ইনি সকলকে মোহিত করতেন। Eventually, however, the Vaishnavis began to be stigmatized as morally lax and corrupting, and she was no longer allowed to educate women in the household. Her very presence, her very contact was began to be considered contaminating. And as you know, the Vaishnavi was also a performer. She would be singing these kirtans and other devotional and also to a certain extent erotic songs. But in the 19th century, these popular performative traditions were marginalized. They were banished from the urban space, a process that Shumanto Banerjee has pointed out. Now, the Zenana system of education basically continued this pattern of in-house instruction by an external instructor, but the content of education has significantly changed. The curriculum, the content had changed. Women were now being instructed according to a secular curriculum instead of being taught Sanskrit and the various religious texts. Now, Professor Asha Islam has already discussed this. I do not want to repeat, but just I just want to say that yes, the Zenana education was different from home education, education provided by say father, brother, husband, or other male member of family. Okay. In the Zenana system, a teacher visited the student's home on a regular basis or stayed at her residence and gave regular instructions in exchange of remuneration and taught according to a pre-decided curriculum of education. Later, as the system evolved, interested women learners would assemble at a common point, usually somebody's residence on a pre-scheduled time, and the teacher would impart her lessons in that place. In the initial years of Zenana education, the educators, as Professor Islam has already pointed out, were mostly English, American, Canadian, Eurasian, Anglo-Indian white women. Most of them were missionaries, but also there were some wives of missionaries who were accompanied their husbands to this colony. Like if you have read Jane Eyre, then Jane Eyre was supposed to marry a missionary, and that man was planning to come to India, but then Jane did not marry him finally. Okay, so wives of missionaries and also wives of government servants. Now, these overall, these white women, including the missionaries, they pretended to be in India with a civilizing mission, entrusted, as they thought themselves to be, with the white woman's burden. Yes, I'm indebted to Professor Asha Islam for this coinage, and I've used it in another of my writings. I have translated it to Shetangini Dai. Okay, I think Asha is the first historian who's talked of the white woman's burden. Yes, so they were actually, these women, they were actually on the lookout for some adventure, for some romantic adventure and were also lured by prospects of finding bridegrooms. There is no denying the fact that these white women were the initial linchpins of the Zenana system of education, and they continued to be so for quite some time. And these groups of missionaries, the missionary organizations, they played a very important role in the proliferation of Zenana education. But as she pointed out, that these women were not heartily welcomed in contemporary Bengali society. Most of them had a covert proselytizing agenda, and moreover, they were quite expensive. I mean, they demanded quite a high remuneration for their services as teachers. And many of them were not very educated and were not in a position to impart even the basics of learning. Like, let me read out from one small report published in one newspaper named Bharat Sanskaro on 2nd October 1874. ইহাদের দ্বারা শিক্ষা কার্যের উন্নতি আশা করা বৃথা, ইহারা বাংলা ভাষা নিতান্ত অপটু, বাইবেল পড়িতে জানেন এবং ছাত্রীদিগকে তাহাই একটু একটু পড়াইতে পারেন, কিন্তু তাহা ধর্মের উদ্দেশ্যে যত, বিদ্যার উদ্দেশ্যে তত নয়। এই জন্য ইহারা অনেক স্থানে ভয়াবহ বলিয়া পরিত্যক্ত হন। ইহাদিকে যারা যাহা কিছু আদর প্রসম্বনা শিখাইবার জন্য, কিন্তু বাঙালির ঘরে তাহা কোনো উপকারে আসে না। তদপেক্ষা সূচিকার্য ভালোরূপে শিখিলে অনেক মঙ্গল। Now, let me give you a few instances of Bengali women actually converting to Christianity under the influence of these Mem Sahib governesses. Now, in 1840, Gyanendra Mohan Tagore's wife Bala Sundari Devi, she came under the influence of one Mem Sahib governess, and she converted herself to Christianity. Then in around about 1870, Bama Bhagini Putrika, a Brahmo mouthpiece, it came up with a report on one Ganesh Sundari. Ganesh Sundari was a Hindu widow. Now, she was being trained, tutored by an by a Christian teacher, lady named Martha. And this lady, she managed to convince Ganesh Sundari that embracing Christianity would be a much better proposition, and moreover it would save her from going to hell, and so she converted to Christianity. Now, Ganesh Sundari's brothers, these filed a suit in court, but the case was resolved in favor of the missionary, because the girl was already adult. She was above the age of 18 years. But very soon after this conversion, Ganesh Sundari became disenchanted with Christianity, and this time she embraced Brahmo Dharma, Brahmoism. And as a Brahmo, she was renamed Mon Mohini, and she was married to Radhakanto Bandopadhyay. Now, if you have read Begum Rokia Sakwat Hussein's Nurse Nelly, this is again a very touching tale of a Muslim girl who came under. She was a married woman, and she had 2 children, and she was quite happy. She was quite happy as a wife. Okay, her husband was an ICS, and yes, they were a very happy couple. But after the birth of her second child, she fell ill, and she came in contact with these missionary women, and they succeeded in convincing her that Christianity was the best option for her. And initially, she did not. She tried to. She did not immediately convert to Christianity. She tried to educate her daughter, Jamila, by employing a European governess. Now, that governess, she was named Miss Lawrence, and that governess became Nayeema. Her name was Nayeema. This married woman I'm talking about, Nayeema's friend, philosopher, companion, guide, everything. And one day, Noema just fled from her home, leaving her husband, her children behind. Okay. And now, then her two children died, and her husband also. I mean, when he was shattered. He was shattered, and Noema too was soon disenchanted with Christianity, but she could not return. All the doors of her own house were closed to her. She could not go back to her own home. And when this author, when the narrator Rokia met her, she was working at a hospital in Lucknow, and the whole story had a very tragic end. She died. Even this paranoia, this grave suspicion that these white governesses, Christian governesses, would kind of induce these very vulnerable and impressionable women and try to convince them to convert. So this was there even among Muslims. Okay. But it was not just the fear of conversion that made white governesses so unacceptable. Apprehensions ran wild that white governesses would corrupt women's morals, that they would be incited to choose their own husbands for marriage under the immoral impact of the memsites and their overall exposure to Western values. Okay. And there was an increasingly felt need for indigenous governesses. The Asha 1867 issue of a periodical named Shikhak Darpon put forward the demand for Charitra-shila Swadeshiya Shikhoitri, teachers, indigenous teachers of good moral character. It wrote, খ্রিস্ট ধর্মাশ্রিতা কতকগুলি শিক্ষয়িত্রী পাওয়া যায় বটে, বা তাহাদের সংখ্যা অতি অল্প, মূল্য অনেক অধিক এবং ধর্মবেদ নিবন্ধন তারা হিন্দু পরিবার মধ্যে সম্পূর্ণ শ্রদ্ধার পাত্রী হতে পারে না. Now, I'm not translating each and every Bengali word that I'm uttering. If anybody among the audience fails to understand these words, then please ask me at the end. I'll translate these lines for you. Now, in 1862, Keshav Chandra Sen, a leader of the Brahmo Samaj, set up the Brahmo Bondhu Sabha. This Sabha established the Antopur Sri Shikha Sabha, mostly for the education of Pordanoshin adult women and married Hindu girls. In 1863, Umesh Chandra Datta and Vijay Krishna Goswami set up the Bama Bhagini Sabha. The main objectives of this Sabha were the publication of books and journals for women and to arrange for the education of senior women in Bengali households and take every kind of positive step for the welfare of women. The Bama Bodhini Potrika was a mouthpiece of this Sabha, the Bama Bodhini Sabha. In 1864, Bama Bodhini Sabha and Keshav's Antopur Sri Shikha Sabha were merged. A number of other organizations came up for the purpose of Antopur education. And their numbers steadily increased over the years. Many of these organizations were set up by Hindus, that is, Hindus who did not belong to the reformist sect of Brahmoism. The Women's Education Project was no longer confined to the urban space, but it tried to reach out to the vast mass of women residing in villages and small towns far away from urban centers like Calcutta and Dhaka. Alongside city-based elite male reformers, organized initiatives by the Mofassal literati were the chief driving force of the Antopur Sri Shikha project. Now, to name a few of these organizations arranging for in-house education of women in East Bengal, we have Bikrampur Shammelani Sabha, we have Faridpur Shuhid Sabha, Rangpur Sabha, and others, many others. Now, women themselves also took the initiative to set up organizations for catering to the educational and economic requirements of those women who were lagging behind. I will briefly discuss here some of these organizations. Now, in 1883, Swarna Kumari Devi, Swarna Kumari Devi established the Shokhi Shamiti. Now, the main objective of the Shokhi Shamiti, in the words of the editor of Bhagini Potrika, was Hindu Antopure Upojukto Shikhoitri Dara Shikha Prochar. In 1910, Sharola Devi Chaudhurani, the Swarna Kumari Devi's daughter, established the Bharati Mahamandal. Younger daughter, Swarna Kumari Devi had two daughters, Hiranmoyini Devi and Sharola Devi Chaudhurani. Now, Bangla, yes, and this Bharati Mahamandal, this would send this again. It took a very important role, a very significant role in the proliferation of Zenana education. This organization would send governesses to households. In 1912, this provided Zenana education to 125 women, and 22 governesses were appointed with the same. Now, Soroj Nolini Dotto. She was the wife of Guru Shodar Datta. Soroj Nolini established Mohila Samitis in various parts of Bengal. In Pabna, in Birbhum, in Sultanpur, Rampurat, in Bankura. Now, apart from providing medical support to women and also training them to be self-reliant and engaging in cottage industries, these Mohila Samitis took steps for the spread of Zenana education. So very, very concrete steps they took. The Bankura Mohila Samiti, it was set up in 1921. It set up 6 centers of Antopur learning. Now we get to hear of one Srimati Shoilobala Chakraborty who would take classes twice a week in every center. Her salary was paid by the government municipality. After Soroj Nolini's death in 1925, the Soroj Nolini Nari Mongol Samiti, established by her husband Guru Shodar Datta, carried forward her vision and mission. It continued with the task of setting up Mohila Samitis in distant villages and educating women at their homes. Now, in 1919, Abola Boshu, she is remembered as the wife of Jagadish Chandra Boshu, but she was a great organizer. She was a great educationist, but we rarely talk about her achievements. Only a few days back, Brahmo Samaj celebrated her birthday, but how many of us have heard of her own achievements? Okay. Now, sure, Abola Boshu founded the Nari Shikha Samiti with the purpose of spreading education among rural women. She established free girls' schools in villages and began to train widows for a career of their own. They could serve as a teachers. Teaching was a very kind of a welcome kind of career option to widows and other women who were in distress, who did not have a home, did not have income of their own. We must remember that these governesses, the governesses that we are talking about, they did not have a bag full of degrees. It's not that they were university toppers, or they were not. Many of them were not even, most of them in fact were not even graduates. They probably had gone to school, or they were trained in these normal schools set up for the training of teachers. Okay, yes, teaching was a very, very kind of lucrative and also a very prestigious profession before women, a very viable career option. Besides the organizations that I mentioned above, that is non-governmental organizations, as we would call them in modern parlance, the government took an increasing interest in Zenana education and attempted to bring the curriculum, examinations, and also the recruitment of governesses under its control. In January 1902, it set up the house-to-house visitation scheme and appointed 12 Hindu and Muslim governesses. In 1903, it started the central gathering scheme. In the scheme, girls or women interested in learning, they would assemble at some common point, say somebody's house, and the governess would teach them all together. Now, the government took to various kinds of initiatives to give Zenana education a formal institutional structure, and also appointed inspectors and other officials for the surveillance, for the monitoring of the system, and also for exercising surveillance over these teachers. Okay. Another important significant point was that the Zenana education under governmental supervision was redesigned in a manner that would cater to both Hindu and Muslim women. The government preferred to appoint Hindu and Muslim governesses, even though qualified Christian and Brahmo governesses were more readily available. Now, Muhammad Amirunnisa Khanum, was the first Muslim woman to join the post of Zenana governess. She joined on 1st January 1909 in the Dhaka subdivision. Muhammad Faizunnisa Khatun, who joined office in the Dhaka subdivision on 1st March 1912, was the second. In 1919, in this financial year, the total number of Zenana governesses in the Burdwan and Presidency divisions was 28. 7 of these governesses catered exclusively to Muslim women. Now, Binoy Bhushan Rai, if you're interested in Antapur Sri Shikha, you must read Binoy Bhushan Rai's book, Antapur Sri Shikha. It also has an English translation. It has an English version. Okay. Now, according to Binoy Bhushan, Binoy Bhushan Rai provides a list of governesses in the Dhaka division in 1927. Now, this is a big list, and what we find very interesting is that that several of these governesses were Muslims, a few Christians, the remaining were Hindus or Brahmos. Okay, so Muslim women were also embracing the profession of a governess. They were also opting for the career of a governess, and this is indeed a very significant finding according to me. Yes, when we talk of the social reform of the women's question and women's awakening in Bengal, we tend to speak more about Hindu women or Brahmo women. We really do not keep in mind Muslim women. But Muslim women were not only a very important part of the Zenana system of education. They were not just as beneficiaries, but also they were employed as teachers, as the instructors who catered education to women at their residence. Okay, so this whole thing, the whole very whole idea of the Zenana system of education around Antapur Sri Shikha has to be redefined if we take into account these above facts and figures. And yes, it appears from government records that these governesses were the direct employees of the government, and they were also liable to transfer. Uh, Moreover, it appears from what little information that we can gather from existing records, that these governesses had to travel a lot every day. They had to avail public transport, stay in hostels, or arrange for their home education. They hardly got the opportunity to commute from their own homes or stay with their families. The lives of these itinerant governesses might have been full of excitement and adventure, and all kinds of pleasant and unsavory experiences as well. But we have hardly any way of getting a glimpse of their everyday lives. Apart from governmental and non-governmental initiatives, wealthy households often appointed in-residence governesses for their female inmates, like their Victorian counterparts. These appointments were made on an individual basis, and the government and non-governmental organizations had nothing to do with them. These in-house governesses were probably, they were not required to teach according to a specific curriculum, but I'm not very sure about it. But one thing that I find in some records is that the job of an in-house governess was probably financially more rewarding than that of a visiting governess or a teaching job in a school. And white women had not vanished from the scene altogether. It appears from contemporary farces and fiction. And yes, there was still an overt or covert tendency to link a woman's immorality to her exposure to Western values under the tutelage of a Mem Sahib governess. Now, I would have liked to draw your attention, if I had the time, to one farce by Ponchanon Rai Choudhury. The farce is titled Kya Baat Me. And this girl, her name is Maloti. She's in love with a kind of a scoundrel. His name is Vishwavaka Shaduka. But she elopes with this man. But then after her elopement, her father realizes that he had made a mistake by entrusting Maloti, by employing a Mem Sahib governess for Maloti's education, by entrusting the education of Maloti in the hands of a Mem Sahib. Okay. Now, even we find these Mem Sahib governesses in Chokher Bali, in Rabindranath Tagore's Chokher Bali. We also find Miss Gilby employed by Nikhilesh in Rabindranath Tagore's Ghare Baire. And mind you, both Binodini of Chokher Bali and Vimola of Ghare Baire, they had transgressed. So could there be still, I mean, a kind of linkage working in the minds of even these very progressive writers, the linkage between European tutors, European instructors, and moral transgressions? I don't know, because this has not been very overtly, explicitly articulated in any of these texts, except in these Bortala farces, the farce that I'm talking about. Okay. Now, resident governesses were liable to sexual harassment or indecent proposals from their male employers. Hoimabati Sen, before she became a doctor, had served as a governess to a Rani in East Bengal. The Raja would openly seek her company and make all kinds of sexually suggestive proposals. Hoimabati had to quit her job. Now, this is the only instance of sexual harassment that I've come across, sexual harassment faced by a resident governess, but there might have been many others. And as a historian of women, I would like to know more about these experiences. These kind of very unpleasant experiences of women who had ventured into the professional world, the big bad professional world, in search of self-reliance, in search of a career. Now, the vocation of a governess, I'll finish in 5 minutes, evidently opened up unprecedented opportunities for romance as well. Many of the protagonists of novels penned in this era, especially novels penned by women novelists, were governesses. And these governesses, they became symbols of self-reliance and also romantic passion. Governesses appear as leading protagonists, for instance, in Sita Devi's Rajanigandha and Parabhatrika in Shanta Devi's Chirantani. Now, these governesses, these protagonists, they were all ordinary women, neither extraordinary beautiful, nor wealthy, nor accomplished, but they had a mind of their own. Okay, they fell in love, married the men they loved, and moreover were educated, intelligent, and self-reliant. They craved for a man's love as passionately as they craved for independence and self-reliance. Now, in this respect, I notice a commonality between the governesses depicted in the novels by the Bronte sisters, Charlotte Bronte, Anna Bronte, and those portrayed by the Chattopadhyay sisters. Now, both Sita Devi and Shanta Devi, they were daughters of Ramananda Chattopadhyay, a leading Brahmo reformer, the editor of Provashi and Modern Review, and also Dasi. Now, the Chattopadhyay sisters were academically brilliant and must have read the novels by the Brontes, but it would be unfair to suggest that the Chattopadhyay siblings emulated the Brontes. The commonalities, I would argue, were due to the changing context of women's lives, precisely their growing access to education and employment, a process that had started in England a few decades earlier than in the colony. Both sets of novelists were poised on critical junctures of their respective histories, junctures that marked women's increasing movement outside the home for education and an occupational career, often driven by the imperatives of survival, and hence with greater scope for romantic intimacy and marriages based on choice. No wonder the women protagonists of the novels by the Brontes and Chattopadhyay's, they were all very erudite, accomplished, and independent. Their quest for livelihood was intertwined with the quest for love, for a romantic and conjugal bond that was not for the sake of status, security, or economic support, or sheer adherence to familial expectations and societal norms, but for emotional fulfillment. In these respects, the protagonists of the Bronte novels differed from, say, the women in Jane Austen's novels, for whom drawing room courtship and marriage that conformed to societal standards and expectations were seemingly the summum bonum of their existence. Similarly, the predecessors of Sita Devi, Shanta Devi, such as Swarna Kumari Devi, Anurupa Devi, Nirupama Devi, Shailabala Ghosjaya, and others, foregrounded women who asserted their right to marry the men they loved and reject a life denied union with their lover, but they did not envisage employment or a life beyond domesticity. It was with the Brontes in England and with the Chattopadhyay sisters here in closer home in Bengal that women in fiction first began moving out of their homes in quest for love and livelihood. Okay. Now, I would have loved to discuss some of these novels, but I don't have time. But only at the end, I would like to say that this trope of the governess, self-reliant and also romantic, it continued even after independence, and it was one of the very popular tropes of post-independence Bengali films. For instance, if we take into account Uttram Suchitra's Harano Shur, or the Aparna Sen and Uttam Kumar starrer Joy Jayanti, we find that the leading protagonist is a governess. And the governess is a very independent-minded woman, but at the same time, she is in love. And yes, and she ultimately she unites with her lover. So the governess becomes a symbol of continues to be even after independence, after the colonial, even beyond the colonial context, the governess remains a symbol of independence, economic self-reliance, a successful professional career, and also love. She just remains a symbol of mission and passion. Okay, thank you. I will not continue anymore. I mean, I have already taken a lot of time. Thank you once again for giving me a patient hearing.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Dr. Bandopadhyay, for this amazing lecture session. We have a lot of questions and a lot of comments, but there's a shortage of time, so we will pick some questions for you, and others I will send you to your email. First, for Dr. Asha Islam, question asked by Bruce Wen. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible, ma'am.
Yes, I can hear you.
Bruce Wen asked the question, could you please elaborate on the role played by Begum Rokeya in colonial Bengal?
Yes. First of all, I would like to make a correction. She all through her life she called herself Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, and the Begum somehow the Begum got fixed to her name, but actually she always signed herself as Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, and the proper way to address her is Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain. Begum came later from Eastern Bengal, obviously. The role of Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, definitely we call her the first feminist of Bengal, and she is the symbol of resistance to patriarchal control. She left her in-laws home, and she came to Kolkata as a widow, and with the money that her husband had left her, she set up this school, which still stands proud in Kolkata. And every time I go to Kolkata, I visit her school. It is like a shrine to me, and she continues to inspire women of Bengal in general, and Bangladesh in particular. At the Dhaka University, we have a hall named after her, Rokeya Hall, and in Rangpur we have a university named after her. So there is a Rokeya University. From these you can understand what an inspiration she is, and she literally in 1911, when she established her school, when she set up her school, she literally went from door to door begging Muslim parents to send their girls to school, and she is the beacon that still continues to inspire us, and there is no end to the amount of contribution she had in bringing Muslim girls to school and spreading Muslim education, and trying to break the notion of Padda. Aparna has talked about Padda, and in her writings, she continuously attacked the Padda system. She didn't mean that girls should not cover their heads or girls should not dress modestly. What she meant in her writings, she has numerous writings. She kept writing about breaking the Padda of the mind, the narrowness of the mind. And she herself dressed very modestly, and all her life she covered her head. All her pictures, in all her pictures, her head is covered. But she broke the Padda of the mind. She broke away from the rigidity of Muslim society, and she wanted to establish, she wanted to spread the light of education among the backward Muslim families. So she is an inspiration that knows no bounds. Thank you.
Next question from Moshumi Mojumdar. What was the specific role played by the medical missionaries in colonial Bengal?
The medical missionaries in colonial Bengal. Yeah, with the medical missionaries, for the first time, Bengali women got a chance to get treated by people who had at least some knowledge about medical science. Before that, before the female missionaries opened hospitals and nursing stations, women were not allowed to be treated by male doctors. And so in Bengali literature, we continuously find instances, references where women were dying during childbirth. And we also see in movies where mothers, while giving birth, they're dying because they're not being allowed to go to the hospital to be treated by a male doctor. So the role of the medical missionaries is immense in helping the women of Bengal, in helping in their health needs, in their needs for knowledge about hygiene. And for the first time, through the medical missions, the women of Bengal got proper treatment for their ailments, and wherever the medical missions were working, death of women during childbirth was significantly reduced. And Aparna was talking about Dr. Huimavati Sen. Huimavati Sen she left her memoirs, and in her memoirs, Huimavati Sen tells about the suffering of women, especially during childbirth, because the local dyes, they could not treat complicated cases. So the medical missions, in saving the lives of Bengali women, giving them proper treatment for the first time in history, is a great contribution. Thank you.
Two more questions I have chosen. One from Anjana Chatterjee. Did Western education had any real influence on women of that period?
Is the question for me?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I thought it was for Aparna. Can you repeat the question, please?
Did Western education had any real influence on women of that period?
Oh, of course. Western education showed. Now, Western education is a broad term for the girls who were allowed to go to school. Their lives changed forever, because introduction to the outer world, introduction to the world of literature, introduction to the world. If you learn how to read and write, the whole world opens up before you. And that alone, I mean, even let's not even talk about learning English. Let's talk about just learning Bengali. If the women who learned how to read in Bengali, even for them, a whole world opened up. And English, the knowledge of English opened up the rest of the world to them. And anyone who all the thousands of girls who got an education, they were able to teach their children. So as Napoleon had said, give me an educated mother, I will give you an educated nation. The education of the mother was the main. An educated mother is always motivated to educate her children, and through an educated mother, another generation of learned children came up. So yes, whoever like in 1849, the Beton School opened in Kolkata. So since 1849, and in Dhaka, the first Brahmo school opened in 1873, and the secular education provided there, it just it changed the whole scenario of Dhaka. We see women who are going to theaters. We see women who are writing. We see women who are contributing to the Bhagini Putrika, and it is a whole new world. Yes, so Western education contributed a lot to the amelioration of Bengali women. Thank you.
There are a lot of questions for Dr. Asha Islam and Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay, as we are having a shortage of time, so I have picked some questions. And now for Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay, there are a lot of questions, I'm again saying, but just a few one. One question asked by Moshumi Mojumdar. What was the role of the missionary governesses to make the Zenana aware of the basics of health and hygiene among Pardhanashins?
Well, the missionary, the governesses, they did have a role, but were they allowed? I doubt whether they were allowed to enter. I mean, the very private domain of the household. And actually, they were kept away. I mean, their touch was considered polluting. And so I'm not sure whether these missionary governors could in any way, could effectively influence the way in which health issues were addressed within the household. Because there was always a kind of a distance maintained between them. But yes, they must have had a positive role. I mean, at least to a certain extent, they must have had a positive role. But I think this is one field, one theme that needs to be researched. That needs to be more research on this. Okay. Now, because there were some basic differences in the lifestyles of Western women and Indian women. No? I mean, the way we ate, the way we kind of washed ourselves, and also I don't think. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, this is, of course, this needs research. But right at this moment, I'm not in a position to adequately address your question. Because I don't have much information in this regard, okay? Because I've looked upon them as teachers, okay? But I think Ashadi, could you enlighten us on this? I mean, to what extent they helped in the overall health health care of indigenous women?
Wherever missionaries could go, they did teach about hygiene, because you talked about the curriculum of Zenana education, and one of the main points of the curriculum was domestic science. And domestic science included hygiene. It even included how to make the bed, how to air the bed, how to keep the house dry, how to keep kitchen utensils clean, how to wash the kitchen utensils, how to wash hands. So just the simple act of stressing the washing of hands, that improved hygiene a lot. So even the simple thing, even the simple method of washing of hands with soap, this was absent in the hinterlands and in the villages and even in the cities. And I can't help but remember, but say that, and after the corona pandemic, we have learned that we have to wash hands for 20 seconds, not 2 seconds like we used to do before. And I count 20 seconds when I wash my hand, and I find it a long time. 20 seconds is a long time to keep washing your hands. So just this simple task of washing the hands was taught, and it went a long way. This simple thing went a long way to maintain hygiene. So wherever the missionaries went, wherever the governesses went, wherever the Zenana peripatetic teachers went, they taught these simple methods of hygiene. And so yes, they did contribute a lot to health and hygiene. Thank you.
One more question for Dr. Bandopadhyay. Could you please shed some light on the role of Muslim governess in the domain of Muslim household? Because it is definitely a least explored arena. It's asked by Pritha Lahiri Ghosh.
Definitely a list.
Definitely.
Yes, could you repeat the question?
Explore.
Yeah, least explored. Of course, it's a least explored terrain. But again, Muslim governesses in Muslim households. I mean, I have posed questions. I have posed a few questions in this presentation, and I'm groping for answers myself. And as I pointed out, that these are terribly under-researched terrains. Okay, so just the fact that we are finding a few Muslim the names of a few Muslim women in records of schools and organizations, that itself is a revelation to me. And now for the next part of the research, I have to wait. And all of you, please wait. And all of you, and I would encourage you all to.
Alpana, can I have a list right in front of me. Shall I read out some
Yes,
names?
of course. Yes, okay. Yes.
So there is the problem is the list that I have is from Eastern Bengal, not from Kolkata. Well, there is in Dhaka there is Bakshi Bazar. There is this the household is of Maulavi Nejabut Ali Khan, and then there is Bibi Manzura Banu, who is the head of the household. And then there is Maulavi Asad Bakht, who is the head of the household. There is Maulavi Mansur Ali, who is the head of the household. There is Mirza Muhammad Qasim Shiraji, who is the head of the household. All these are in Dhaka. Maulavi Waris Ali, Maulavi Dadun Mia, and there is a Dr. Nawab Ali, who lived in Dhaka and who invited Zenana teachers into his home twice a week for his daughters to be taught. And Dr. Nawab Ali is quite famous. And then there is Haji Amiruddin, there is Munshi Abdul Malik. So in the government records, government record, and there is Maulavi Mujibur Rahman, and there is Babu. No, so what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is, in government records there are endless lists of households where the Zanana women went, endless lists of Muslim households. So because I work on Eastern Bangladesh, I don't have the list of West Bengal. I'm sorry, but documents, they have long lists of households. Thank you very much.
Yes, but what about how did the Muslim governesses interact with their Muslim boards in the Muslim households, Muslim students? I mean, have you found any evidence in this regard? The role of the Muslim governess in the Muslim household.
That, as you have mentioned in your presentation, it was wonderful. I haven't thanked you for it. It was a brilliant presentation. That, unfortunately, we would have known if they had left memoirs.
Yes.
But they have not. So, unfortunately, as much as we would love to know about it, we don't have access to any information.
Right.
And we feel really sorry for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. Yes, Sutapa?
Just last question to Professor Bandopadhyay, Tania Sinha. What made women so early disenchanted to Christianity after they willingly converted themselves to this religion? Was there any concrete reason at all?
But yes, again, we don't have records like Ganesh Sundari or Bala Sundari, wife of Ganendra Mohan Tagore. They have not left behind any piece of writing, any piece of self-writing on the basis of which we could try to gauge the reason why they became disenchanted. But we've got these newspaper reports, and of course the newspaper reports might have been biased. They might have been gone out to prove that this Christianity was not a good thing after all, that Christianity was something which was bad for the mind of women. So we do not actually know what these women felt within and why they felt disenchanted. Like even Rokia has written about one Nurse Nelly, and she's supposed to be, Nurse Nelly is supposed to be her own brother's wife. But then why Nurse Nelly began regretting? Of course, she had left her family, her children, her husband behind. That could be one reason why she was regretting. But was that the only reason? Leaving one's own religion and embracing another one in a fit of the moment, in a sudden impulse. I think that ultimately leads to disenchantment, a kind of disillusionment.
Shutapa, can I add something here?
Yes.
Shutapa, can I add? Yes. The majority of the conversions happened in the lower classes, because the upper classes, the middle class, women from the middle and upper classes, they did not convert much. The lower classes converted most, and from Christian missionary sources. From Christian missionary sources, we see they are writing that these people, they think that by converting to Christianity, the Christian missions will give them money, they will get financial benefits from converting to Christianity, but when they do not get financial benefits from the missions, they get disenchanted. So this piece of information I have found in the reports of the Christian missionaries who are sending their reports to the headquarters in England. So they're saying that the lower classes, they convert in the hope of getting financial benefits, but when they don't get financial benefits, they reconvert to their old religion. So that is a factor.
Yes, but the women I had talked about, Bala Sundari Devi or this Ganesh Sundari, I mean, they belong to the upper stratum of society. I mean, their motive was not financial gain, but
Yeah.
there must have been some reason for disenchantment.
Probably the social pressure of leaving
Yes,
your peer group,
of course, that
of
could be one reason.
becoming an outcast, becoming a social outcast. After all, people, humans are social beings. So becoming a social outcast was a big pressure. So they wanted to get back in, and yeah. So I think that could be an
Yes,
explanation.
that could be. Yes, that could be the reason.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such an enlightening and enchanting question answer session. There are a lot of questions. We are very sorry that we couldn't place everything here, but we will definitely send them to the resource persons. It's for the participants that we will send them to the resource persons for the further correspondence. Now we are at the end of the session. I would like to invite our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Rajesh Dash, for vote of thanks. Dr. Rajesh Dash.
Thank you, Sutapati. Good evening, everybody. It is an honor for me to express my gratitude to everyone present here on this occasion of this one-day international webinar entitled Missionary Women and Governance, Mission, Passion and Career in Colonial Bengal, jointly organized by Department of History and Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Kishore Bharati Bhagini College, Kolkata, and Department of History and IQAC, New Alipore College, Kolkata. In this process of vote of thanks, first of all, I want to pay my sincere gratitude and thanks to chief patrons of this international webinar, Dr. Shiv Shankar Shana, Honorable Principal, Kishore Bharati Bhagini College, and Dr. Joydeep Sarangi, Honorable Principal, New Alipore College, Kolkata, for their support and encouragement. I would like to pay my sincere thanks to today's speaker duo, Dr. Asha Islam Nayeem, Professor of History, University of Dhaka, and Dr. Aparna Bandopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of History, Diamond Harbour Women's University. Thank you, madam, for your valuable speech.
Thank you.
I would like to thank Dr. Shravani Dotto, Head at Department of History, and Dr. Samabroto Das, IQAC Coordinator, as well as members of the IQAC for their collaborative support. I am very thankful to the teachers and students of both colleges for joining this webinar. I pay my sincere thanks to the faculty members and students from different institutions of India and Bangladesh for joining this webinar. And last but not the least, I want to pay my sincere thanks to technical support team. Without their contribution, it was quite impossible to host this webinar. So finally, with a wish of good health, I conclude my vote of thanks. Thank you. Sutapal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Now I would like to request our principal, Dr. Shiv Shankar Shana, to make an official end of this program. Sir.
I declare that this program ends here. Thank you everybody for their patience to listen the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having me here. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Asha Islam. We will again invite you and Dr. Bandopadhyay.
Okay.
He will join us again. Thank you.
ইউটিউব লাইভ শুভঙ্কর এন্ড করেছো
ইউটিউব লাইভ এন্ড হয়ে গেছে।